Hi, my name is Mike Kissinger. I'm here at the War Memorial Building in San Francisco. Today we're going to do another program for the benefit of veterans returning from the military, returning from Afghanistan and Iraq. We're going to be talking about the downsizing of the military, or the down draw. We're going to be talking about ways that you as a veteran who's coming back can find a way to optimize your military background, experience, and what it is that you want to do in your life. So the real question is, are you ready for the drawdown that's occurring at the end of the year? You know, thank you for your service. Every person in America, I would assume, is thankful for all it is that you've given to us. I was a military member myself. I was an ex-Special Forces member. And so when you're coming back through this transition, what you're really looking at is how can you take all the things that's happened to you, good, bad, or indifferent, and turn them into something that makes your life the best that it can be. So if you listen to what's happened with the president and the various comments, you know, about guys coming back, the focus has been primarily on veterans returning. However, what happens when veterans return? Veterans either leave the military, they can stay in the military, they can do different things, they can change different types of service. You know, but the question for you as an individual member of the military is, what are you going to do? Because now you might be facing a different section of life. You might be on that crossroad that people talk about. So for you, what is the best way that you can go through this process? One of the things that we looked at was, what are the things that you or your family could do for the troop reduction that's taking place? You know, and it may be a question that you've never asked yourself. It may be something that if you take a TAPS program, or you're talking to different people as you're leaving the military, they might ask you, what are you going to do? And your question may be, what's the best way that I can optimize this experience to do the things that I have to do? Well, there's 10 things that you need to know, and let's look at the first one. The first one is to get updated information. And what happens with a lot of people that come back from the military is they haven't done the type of research that would really help them to optimize their life, or to look at what's the differences between staying in and staying out. You know, so the question is, if you were going to have to leave the military, for instance, is that a good decision for you to make? Especially if you might not have to do it. And I'm not advocating, I'm not a recruiter saying that staying in the military is something you want to do, because I left the military. And there's a lot of guys that leave the military, and there's a lot of different reasons. But when you get ready to leave the military, you want to start looking at getting updated information. Next thing you might want to look at is, who are you communicating with? Are you communicating with the experts that actually can help you improve your life once you leave the military? Or are you talking to your friends? Or are you thinking about going back and home and living with mom and dad, or living with your relatives and saying, okay, well, maybe they're going to take care of us? You know, so one of the entities that I work with is Swords and Plowshares. And what we do is we help veterans who go through the transition process. We help all kinds of different veterans. So the issue becomes, who do you really talk to? Do you talk to the TAP personnel that's at your base? Do you talk to different guys that are getting ready to leave? How is it that you make a decision on what you're going to do next? So communication is obviously one of the major things you want to look at. If you're having communication and you're going through this process, the third step is to examine your options both inside the military and outside the military. I have a friend who was a colonel. He was one of the top 3 commanders in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they had him leave the military. And it wasn't because he had a bad record. The issue was, he was very good at doing what he was doing, but because he had spent his 26 years in the military, the issue became for him, should he leave or should he stay? What's going to happen to you inside and outside the military? So you need to check that and keep that in mind. What's happening with the economy? Is it good for you to leave? Well, if you've been listening to the news that I've listened to, you find out that there's all kinds of bad things that are happening in the American economy, but that should not stop you from making the type of decision that you need, or looking at your options. Next thing you might want to consider is, what about National Guard units or various reserve units? If you're on active duty, you know, is that an option that's available to you? Is that when I came back from the military, I joined another Special Forces unit here, and I enjoyed jumping out of planes, and I enjoyed doing those different types of things. So you as a veteran who's coming back, what is it that will allow you to live the life that you want to live, so that way you can optimize your future? Next thing you might want to look at is brushing up on your skills. Now, if you're in the infantry, you know, when I came back, you know, the issue was, where can you get the best job? Well, I was an expert doing what it is that I did. You know, and so you come back and you talk to different people and you're looking at the types of skills that you have. I could have joined the mob, made $1 million a hit. You know, so when you start looking at what your skills really are, do you have the type of skills that a civilian employer would want to hire you for? You know, and there's 10 reasons why that we always talk about as far as having employers hire veterans. But the individual, you as the individual vet, have to really ask yourself that question, what's on your resume? Have you taken that resume and looked at the job market that you want to be in? Have you determined what are some of the best companies that you can work for? Are you a veteran who may have PTSD? Are you a veteran who is NCO, or maybe is a lower ranking officer, or even a top high ranking officer? These types of things that you start putting in your resume and you start looking at what you can do as a veteran are important for you. So when you do decide to leave the military, if that's your choice, you're now setting yourself up in a position to do that. Next thing you might want to consider is preparing for unemployment. You know, when you first get out of the military, unless you've arranged something ahead of time, you're going to be unemployed. And what's that going to mean to you? Have you saved up your leave time? Have you saved up money while you were in the military? Do you have a source of income or a job that you had prior to going into the military and going to Afghanistan and Iraq and said, okay, well, this is what I can do. So unemployment is a big issue for you to look at, especially if you realize that 11.7% of the veterans are unemployed in America in comparison to a 9.1 unemployment rate for most average Americans. So this is a big issue you may want to consider. Next thing to consider, which is not item number 7, is what about the financial impact? When you're in the military, let's say that you signed up for 3 to 4 years, you had an ongoing consistent income all through that time period, and now you're coming back to an environment in America that is saying, well, yes, we recognize your service, we recognize that you're a veteran, but we also recognize some of the realities that are taking place in America to where we don't have the type of jobs that may be available for you. We don't have the type of employers who are willing to go out on the line and say, okay, because you're a veteran and you did your service, that we want to hire you. In fact, one of the things that I found out as we were putting different programs together was that we had to promise or get a commitment from employers to say, look, if we show you how to make more money in your business, if we show you how to add an extra $250,000 to your business, will you agree that you will hire one of our veterans? You know, and most people hear that and say, well, yeah, why wouldn't I do that? You know, so the reality is you start looking at what you need to do as far as considering the financial impact of what can happen to you as a veteran who's returning. That's another important consideration. The 8th consideration is what about the emotional impact? You know, it's like when I was in the service, I remember going through basic training at Fort Ord, and here, Smokey the Bear came in one morning, banging on the garbage cans, telling me he was late. Well, my comment was, well, if you're late, leave without me. You know, so if you look at what's happening to you, what is that emotional impact that you are going to have when you leave the military? Is it going to be good or bad? Are you going to say, God, I'm so happy to get out of here? Or alternatively, I don't know what I'm going to do because I've been through multiple combats. I've ended up developing PTSD. I've gone through this emotional experience and that emotional experience. So I need to know, and you need to know, exactly how emotionally, how you're going to feel about that. The 10th item is to basically consider industries. You know, if you look at the IT industry, there's certain things that are good and bad about it. If you look at the transportation industry, there's certain things that are good and bad about it. If you look at maybe looking at construction over the last 4 years, I guess since 2007, they've lost 1.3 to 1.7 million construction jobs. In fact, if you look at a lot of the industries that are out there, you find out that since 2007, most of them have lost anywhere from 10% to 25% of their workforce. So is that something that you really take into consideration as a returning veteran saying, well, I'm being downsized now, the service is being downsized, what can I do? One of the industries that I talked about, if you ever listen to the films that we do, is I talked about the wellness industry. And the wellness industry, just like the internet industry, when you start looking at direct marketing or direct sales, is basically a $4 trillion a year industry. And it's an upcoming industry to where when you look at it for who you are and what you may be able to do, you might have enormous skills and abilities to be able to make that transition into saying, okay, well, how is this going to work for us? So what I tell a lot of the guys, if you're looking at industries that are exploding and getting ready to explode, which ones would they be? Would they be the wellness industry that is projected as being, another $2 trillion a year industry in 2016? Would it be internet retail type sales, which is projected as being a $4 trillion a year industry? Or would it be one of the diamond industries? So without taking that under consideration, looking at those 10 items, you may find out that coming back from the military puts you in a place to where you stagnate. And that stagnation is going to take a lot out of you because that's not really where you want to be. You're an action person. You've gone through a lot of combat. You've gone through different things. You've had a military service and career that is exemplary. So why would you want to come back? In fact, one of the things that, not that I really promote Sylvester Stallone, but when they came out with the movie First Blood, what was he really saying in that movie? He was saying, when I was in the service, I was a Special Forces member. I ended up being able to use $1 million pieces of equipment. I was honored for what I did, and I come back and I have long hair, and look at what happens to me. Well, this is something that, as you think about it, you want to conclude happening for yourself, because you really are the best in America. Next thing we're going to go over is veteran unemployment versus civilian unemployment, and there's some interesting sad facts that happen with that. And previously, I made reference to the fact that here we have the Department of Labor, and they're saying that the statistics for veterans is that 11.7% of veterans are currently unemployed. Well, that should not be, ever. Because of why? Because you put in your time in the service, and you have proven that you were responsible, a lot more responsible than a lot of people who are presently working right now. At least that's my opinion. Also, if you look at the unemployment rate of 9.1%, what's really taking place here? What is it that you have that the civilian population doesn't have? When you start quantifying and learning how to sell yourself as the best of who you are, which you are, then you find out that yes, you are there and you should always be working. So how do you make that transition? What has the government done? The government has said if we are willing to give tax incentives up to $9,600 for every employer who will hire you. But what's the problem with that? And it sounds really good. The problem with that is companies are not looking at tax incentives. They're looking for individuals like you who are the best of the best to do what that company needs to have done so you can end up helping them make profits. You can help them grow and continue to stay in business. Another thing that comes up is when you're looking at where you are in this reduction of force, you may want to ask yourself, are you really employable or unemployable? And what does that mean? A lot of times when we come out of the military and we're looking at the skills and the abilities that we have, we speak militaryese. We have been trained in such a way to where we say yes ma'am, no ma'am. We didn't have to have resumes when we went in the military. We were assigned MOSs to perform certain types of jobs based on the skills and the abilities that we had at the time they tested us. Well, looking at the employability or the unemployability of you as a veteran, what do you need to focus on? You know, when you're coming out and you're asking the question, well, what does the civilian workforce look at? So the first thing they look at is your resume. What type of resume can you actually give that causes you to become employable? Well, that resume, if you look at it from a numbers perspective, and you're saying, okay, well here I work for Google, for instance, and I know that as a Google employee, Google's going to pay me $100,000 a year. That sounds pretty good, right? But what do I have to give in exchange in order to meet that $100,000 a year number? That means that Google is going to have to make $1.3 million over what it is that I do for them, or I'm fired. The other thing that I have to look at is what's my value to Google, assuming that I continue to work for them on an average of 5 years. Which means that my value to Google for them to give me $100,000 a year is about $6 million. So when we look at you as a veteran and we're saying, okay, have you demonstrated in your resume that you had this capability, that you had this value in the marketplace, you're looking at yourself, or companies are looking at you in entirely different ways than what it was when you were just, doing whatever service that you provided. Another thing that we look at, Nat, is what about face-to-face contact? A lot of guys come back from the military And they have the illusion that you can go on the internet, you can send your resume out, you can send them to job boards, you can do all this other stuff. So the question becomes, does that really work? And I believe it doesn't work. And the reason I believe that it doesn't work is because as time has gone on in the last 3 to 5 years, the entire way to get a job has totally changed in America. In fact, what's happened now is that in order to get a job in America, you've got to prove value. How valuable are you to the marketplace? And when you think about that and you look at your skills, maybe it may be that when you're looking at your value that you can exchange for a job, as opposed to just thinking that you're going to get a job, you start realizing that you might need a little bit more education. You may need to spend a little more time in the military. You may need to really hone your skills down and find out exactly what you're best qualified to do. Another thing that when you look at what happens and considering that process is, are you interviewing well? You know, there is a series and a cycle, I call it a system, it's sort of a job search system that you go through. So let's say the first step is to come up with a resume. Second step is to make sure that you have a cover letter. Third step may be that you research the types of employers that you want to work with. Fourth step may be that you look at the types of people that you know. Maybe you can get a referral. Next step may be that you're looking at your sort of job history, what's best for you, what's not best for you, what will the marketplace pay. So next step may be, let's look at interviewing. Are you really prepared and qualified to go in and do an interview that actually gets you hired? You know, so it's sort of like when you look at the interviewing process, I look at it from the point of being a business owner and saying, okay, if I want a job, and this is to sell the project if I'm in construction or whatever, how many times do I have to submit an estimate to get a job? And so the ratio is basically 1 in 10. But what happens if I improve that ratio? What happens if I improve, if you're looking for a job? What happens if I improve my resume? What happens if I improve my cover letter? What happens if I improve my interviewing skills? So when I go in to sell me, what happens is I get hired on the spot. So these are just a couple of the things you might want to end up looking at. What about the work? You know, there's all kinds of different things that you can do, especially leaving the military. I mean, if you've got a top secret security clearance, you know, you're driving trucks, you know, you're doing this or that. There are compatible type civilian jobs that you can actually perform. However, do you want to perform them for the rest of your life? You know, so a lot of guys that come back from the military and they're looking at these issues and they might be saying, well, I just want a job today. But what happens in the long haul? What happens to a lot of resumes that I see for veterans? They have resumes that have multiple entry-level jobs because they never detailed a career plan for themselves. And had they set out a career plan for themselves, then what they would find out is their life would progress. They would know where they were going to go next. It's sort of like the, you know, the statement that you can, you know, every journey begins with one step. But if you don't have a direction or map or a plan of where you're going, any step will do. So will that be you as far as what it is that you want to do? Another thing is that when you look at getting a job, there's certain types of qualities that you have to have. And you might want to know what employers are looking for. So employers are looking for candidates that express clearly and articulate their accomplishments. Now, I know from my experience in the military, I have great accomplishments. I know that as a civilian, I was able to do the same thing. But when you look at the accomplishments that you performed in the military, are you average? Are you better than average? Do you have special skills? Can you describe how those skills can actually work with that employer's business to give him what he wants and what he needs? So looking at your accomplishments and being able to express those clearly is obviously a big deal. Next thing is you need to clear a way to brand yourself to make you different. Because you're really dealing in a competitive world right now. I think the number of unemployed people in America is probably close to 17 million people. If you're looking at 17 million people and you are a competitor looking for a job, don't you think that it would be good to have what we refer to in business as a unique selling proposition? What makes you so unique that you can eliminate 17 million people? What makes you so unique within your environment that when you talk to me and you say, I want a certain sum of money because I'm going to hire you, what makes you so unique that I want to pay that sum of money. You know, so if you start looking at that item, you're saying, okay, this is the quality that an employer is looking for. What about the next one? You know, what about being fit? You know, what about looking at the different things that different companies are looking for? One company, if you're looking at construction, might be a really large company. So we're looking for a person who can fit in the cog work and make it work. Suppose, on the other hand, you want to work for a construction company that's small. What are we looking for? We're looking for a person who's top physical condition, who can actually, if they're doing construction, drive nails, you know, bend pipes, do whatever in order to make it work. So when you look at these qualities that an employer is looking for, you need to find a way to fit yourself in that. And so what I always look at when I'm looking at a vet's resume, or I look at jobs that are available for them, I look at what are the job description, what are the job requirements. So when you look at how you can fit back into the civilian workforce and you start looking at those items, you start seeing, well, maybe I fit pretty good here. Maybe this is something I would like to consider because I was a medic, a Marine Corps medic or an Army medic. Maybe I can do this because I was driving deuce and a halves in the military because I fit. Maybe if I turn around and I go to the training that say Swords offers or whatever, and I learn how to drive trucks, maybe that will give me what I want. So now we're starting to deal with fit. So you're really looking at employers, you're saying, okay, how can I best fit in the work environment to make it happen? And that's what employers are looking at in you. The next thing they look at is length of time. Companies are talking about to fill openings. You know, when you look at a company and you're seeing that, you know, I always talk about a company that has 100 employees, and people are saying, well, no, there's not any jobs. Would you realize that 25 people out of every company that has 100 or more people in it lose 25% of their workforce every year? So we're looking at you as a veteran who's trying to end up saying, I'm coming back out of the military and I want to get into this workforce process. You've got to take yourself out of your mindset and put your mindset in the mindset of the employer and say, what is he looking for? How long does he want that person? When you look at what the HR department is doing, is that HR department hiring for that job, or are they hiring for 2 jobs up with this being a starting position? So those things of looking at that, you're saying, okay, can it happen? Can they hit the bullseye because you really meet that target? Chances are you can, you know, but maybe you can't. And that causes you to think even further to say, okay, can I do something to meet those requirements before I get out of the military, so I'm going to be hired as soon as I get out of the military? Next thing you might want to consider is, what are recruiters looking for? You know, there's different ways to get jobs. Obviously, you can use the newspaper, you can use the internet, you can go down to EDD, you can use the veteran services that are available. But this may be something that you want to consider, is what are recruiters looking from you? The first thing that recruiters look for is people who can show they volunteered to do more than was required for them to work in the workplace. So there's an old line that's called going the extra mile. Well, are you willing to go the extra mile and prove to these people, prove the recruiters that you're the person they should take? Next thing they look at is people who know what they don't know. And it's really interesting. You talk to most people and say, well, can you do this? They'll say, absolutely, I can do this. But if you ask them, what about this, do you know that you cannot do it? Because all of us have limitations. And as you get older and you grow and you start learning more and more things about what you can or cannot do, when somebody asks you, can't tell me about all the things that you do because that's your strengths, I also want to know about your weaknesses. Next thing recruiters look at is people who can explain why they did what they did in the job they did in the past. So as a military veteran, that becomes easy to do. On the other hand, if you cannot explain that process, not so much in military ease, but in civilian understanding and words that that employer wants to know about, then what happens is you've now made that transition, so when the recruiter is looking at you, you now become hireable. The next thing that they look at is people who can make an effort to establish a mutually beneficial relationship. So what is that mutually beneficial relationship? I call it exchanging value for value. You have to be able to transition and show that you can give value to an employer. They have to be able to transition with you and say that if we hire you, we now have value as a result of the things that we've done. Next thing the recruiters look at are people who recognize that what they can do can either be counterproductive for themselves or counterproductive for the companies that they work for. So you start looking at this, you say, well, what does that mean? Well, it means that when you start looking at taking the eyes off yourself and looking at what you actually can offer, you're now in a position to offer more because you not only know what an employer is looking at, you know what your strengths are, you know what your weaknesses are, and now you can turn that into a marketable package for yourself. So the recruiter will say, yeah, I'll consider you. I'll take you into this position and we'll be able to do it. One of the things you really need to get into when you start looking at transitioning from the military is how do you translate your skills? And I always figure the easiest way to deal with that is talk to somebody who knows how to do that, because there's things on your resume that you will say because of your military background and training that civilians will never understand. So there is a means of communication that you have to go through with that. And then once you can get squared away on that, you're in good shape. One of the most important things that you can look at now is social media. How do you deal with getting a job today? You start looking and saying, well, I'll do the ad thing. If you know what the numbers are, maybe one ad, you submit a resume to an ad, there are 500 resumes submitted for the same ad. You submit a resume on a job board, there are 5,000 to 10,000 resumes that are submitted for the same job. So what do you really need to start looking at to make yourself different? There are 7 things. One of them is to look at the current environment. We've talked about the unemployment of veterans being 11.7%. Overall, the country's unemployment is 9.1%. So looking at the environment, how about the people that are coming out of the military? There's almost 300,000 people that come out of the military every year. What about the people that are coming out of colleges? This is your competition, so you have to understand the environment. We get into the first thing, and we're saying, okay, how are you going to deal with this? Are you going to do job search, or are you going to do people search? If you start looking for people that you know, you use LinkedIn or that sort of thing, you can find out that your friends may be able to open doors for you, so that way you can get through that process. Next thing you might want to consider is using attraction-based marketing, and that's sort of like learning how to sell yourself. How can you sell yourself best to get the job that you're looking for? Next thing is possibly using or becoming proactive on Twitter. I know that as a person in the military, you probably know what that is. The most important one that you can use is to become involved with LinkedIn, which is professionals that are looking for different types of jobs. Next thing is to look at different types of advertising that's available that you can do. Next one might be to create a video resume that you can put on YouTube. And the last one might be to